Okay, friends. Yeah, we start now. Yeah, I think we should begin. Okay, I don't see the usual. We said it. All right. So, friends, we are up to Ois Vov. So I'd mentioned in the previous year that it behemshich to the stories that the Rebbe tells you of all the Rebbeim, the Mesiris Nefesh for another Yid, the Shtuz, the Kedusha, an Avodah that goes beyond rationale. It could be done by others, or the Avodah was beyond what have been demanded, and the Avodah was such that it was for an individual Jew. The Rebbe speaks in all the examples that he brings. It's except for the story of the Rebbe Rashad, but all of the other stories are stories of the Rebbeim and their tremendous Avos Yisrael for another Yid. So I'd mentioned I'll tell this story, which was only recently, relatively speaking, made public, and I'll share it with you. And this is the story of the night before this Maimer, Yud Shvat Tov Yud Aleph, as related by Rabbi Moishe Groner, Olav Shalom, brother of Rabbi Leibel Groner, Rabbi Yitzchak David Groner, who relates as follows, and I will translate. So this is the night before the big Farbrengen, the night before Yud Shvat, Tavshin Yud Aleph, or more precisely, Yud Aleph Shvat Tavshin Yud Aleph. So the Cheder Maskiris, the room there on the right when you walk in the 770, the room of the Maskiris, of the Secretariat, was empty, except for Rabbi Moishe Groner, who had his place, his chair, his place there in a corner in the Maskiris. The phone rings. Now, Rabbi Moishe spent a long time, often, in the Maskiris room, but he never answered the telephone because he didn't work in Maskiris, except on that occasion because he was the only one there and it was ringing and then ringing again. And so he approached and lifted up the receiver. On the other end is the Rebbe. The Rebbe asked Rabbi Moishe if there's anyone there in Maskiris. Rabbi Moishe says no. And then the Rebbe asked him if he could be so kind as to please come to his home, his house, his apartment. Then the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin lived on the New York corner President. Obviously, Rabbi Moishe answered the affirmative and went quickly to the Rebbe's house. When he came to the house, the Rebbe tells him that there is a Jew who's now in hospital, and the Rebbe wants to visit him. But he needs to know the number of telephone of the doctor who is in charge of his case, appointed over him. And therefore he's asking Rabbi Moishe if he could try and reach the doctor. And when he does, tell me. This is in the Rebbe's apartment. Meanwhile, the Rebbe went into the room where the Svarim were. Eventually, Rabbi Moishe reaches the doctor and calls the Rebbe to see, he has him on the line, the Rebbe should speak to him. So the Rebbe enters into this is like the little foyer. That's where the telephone was. One telephone in the house in those days, and usually it's located kind of centrally. And Rabbi Moishe went into the library or the Rebbe's room where the Svarim were, politely not to listen to the conversation. This is what he saw, Rabbi Moishe Groner. In the center of the table in this room, so there was the Maimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that's the Maimer the Basi Legani, and underneath it was a notebook, and it looks like various rishimas in Iksaviat Kodesh of the Fidik Rebbe. And the date apparently was Tafshin Ches from 1948. Around the Maimer were Svarim from all of the Rebbeim, and they were open. Amongst them also Svarim, the Svarim of the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid, which were closed. After the Rebbe finished the conversation, the phone conversation, he approached Rabbi Moishe and said that he's going now to visit this Jew. And he asked Rabbi Moishe a favor that he should find in amongst the Svarim certain Kabbalah Svarim, which were mentioned in the Maimer, and to please leave them open on the table. I'm assuming these are the two shittis and the Sfiris that Rebbe speaks of in the Maimer. And that's the story, my friends, of the night before. The night before Kabbalah Sanesius, and here too, obviously, the Rebbe could have sent somebody else. I mean, commentary is not necessary. And the Rebbe sends himself, rather, goes to the hospital to visit this single Jew. In a similar vein, I want to share with you, this is a story that is not so well known, but it's brought in this wonderful Sefer, Yemei Bereshis, at the end, put together by the Shliach, my dear friend, the Shliach in Alaska, Rabbi Oscar Greenberg. This is page, for those who want to look it up and have the Sefer at home, it's page 397. So the end there's it's the description of the first Farbrengen put together by various diaries written by Bachrin at the time. So he brings there as follows. It appears that this is just before the Rebbe starts the Maimer. And I want to point out the obvious. I mean, the truth is, the less said, the better. For what do we understand and know of the cosmic significance of the Maimer? But we understand that the Maimer begins the process and the shlichus and the bracha and the empowerment of the Der Hashvi'i to bring the Shechina Lamata, to end the Golos, to bring Mashiach, the culmination of all of history. One can imagine that all of heaven was silent, waiting for the moment. All the neshamas, leaders, all Yidden, angels, this pregnant moment of the Rebbe formally accepting this mandate, the shlichus of the Der Hashvi'i, which, as we all know, was not a simple matter at all for the Rebbe. The many stories related to it. And just before he says the Maimer, a cosmic moment in history, perhaps the ultimate moment, when this shlichus begins in the bracha and the empowerment and the direction and the mission. So just before the Rebbe says these immortal words, Basi Legani, he noticed that there was a fellow there. We only get his first initials, Shin Mem, who lately had been being drawn, being discarded to Yiddishkeit. The Rebbe, was in Yechidus just prior to the Farbrengen on Hey Tevis, as it turns out. And as he related, the Rebbe was asking of him, well, let me just tell you the words. The words the Rebbe says before the Maimer, noticing this young man, is Bocher. He turns to him and he says, Hashef Hakev the car. Did you sell the car? As the story is, but Rebbe had been speaking to him, as I mentioned this earlier, Yechidus, about selling his car, which he owned, and devoting himself totally to Torah study in yeshiva, and it's time for the car, later on in life. So here too, it's astounding to consider that the last moments before this cosmic moment of Basi Legani, the Rebbe is asking this bocher if he sold his car. This is really for Fabrengen. We're learning the Maimon now, so we're not going to elaborate. But the point of the story is not simply the Rebbe's extraordinary presence of mind. Today he has the whole world on his shoulders in the future of Lubavitch. Basi Legani, he's still able to notice also this bocher and his struggle. Perhaps it's really one thing. As he's speaking here, the whole Maimed, that to be mahapech, to transform the koch of the nefesh abamis, to shtuz the kedusha, and it's incumbent upon each and every one of us as individuals. That's exactly what the Rebbe was saying, pointing out, encouraging, demanding of this young man. Let's continue the Maimed Ois Zayin. So the flow of the Maimed is that the shlichus of the Der Hashvi'i is to bring down the Ike Shechina here down to this world forever. And this is done through the avodah of transforming the enthusiasm, the koch of the nefesh abamis to shtuz the kedusha. It continues. So through first iskafia subjugating, and then yishapcha transforming the nefesh abamis and so on, and transforming it to shtuz the kedusha. These are memalim kavana sabriya. So through this we realize and fulfill the intent of creation. Shehi liyis le'yizbarach did b'tachtonim to make this world a home for Hashem. And this that through engaging, subjugating, and transforming our nefesh abamis, we make this world a home for God. Basi Legani, about which Hashem says, "I've come back to my bridal chamber." So says the Rebbe now, it's not the pshat that Hashem is now revealed here on earth to the same degree that he was revealed at the outset of creation, even though that was the Iker Shechina. No, it's even higher than the Shechina that was revealed down here before the Chet. The Rebbe explained earlier that the different levels of Iker Shechina, and he said it was in the Ein Sof. It was the Ein Sof, in the infinite light of Hashem, as there's the Etzem Oid and the Ispashtus Oid, the essence of the light and the manifestation of the light, the manifestation as it is to him, and then there's the third level, which is the one he identified, the manifestation within him as it relates to others, as we explained when we learned, and we learned this in Eis Beis. Here the Rebbe is saying it's even more than that. The Etzem Atzmos Mamish. The K'mei says it being just like one would destroy a building and the only justification would be to build it. So when you're rebuilding that, obviously the new edifice has to be greater than the one being destroyed. Otherwise, what's the point of destroying it? Bamstev explains here, this was the whole, how the Abish was able to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and the time of Hurdus, that the Beis Hamikdash was remodeled and was destroyed, but it's permissible because if the destruction is to make it bigger and better, then of course the destruction itself is part of the binyan. It's part of the building. But the point is, what the Rebbe is emphasizing here is that what is built is greater than what was before. We have to say, the Rebbe is like, this in seichel, and bringing it into the reality of our world, that through the avodah v'skafi and isapche nasis dida b'madrega yos and nilis, we make this world even a greater home in a deeper way than it was at the outset of creation. But my mind explains in the mind of the Rebbe that he says there brings from the Zohar that through subjugating sitrachel, this causes an effusion, or really, as it was explained, the word istalik. It's usually understood as being simply ascending, but we'll soon see how that explains istalkos. So there's an elevation of Yekara, means the glory, the covet of the Holy One, blessed be in all of the world. So he says in the Maimeh, what kind of revelation are we speaking about? All the worlds, that it's this revelation is equal to all the worlds. Now there's higher worlds and lower worlds. So Bechul Almad implies that its relationship to all the worlds is one and the same, which means it's a transcendent revelation, an infinite revelation, compared to which all the worlds are equally close and distant. As it goes in the Sefer, so even though the Frierdiker Rebbe says defines this level by describing it, referring to it as now this is a revelation of godliness, which the Rebbe will now explain, actually has two levels of meaning. Classically, which he says that's not the intent here by the Frierdiker Rebbe. Usually, means, as is implied by the very words, it's a level which transcends all the worlds. Now, on the one hand, it's transcendent, but it's transcendent by contrasting it to creation, like the word infinite. Infinite is a description. It's saying not finite. It's measured, in a sense, by not being finite. It's an indirect description. There are affirmative descriptions, chiyuvi, which describes what something is, and then there's what's called a description that is, but in a way of shlila. It's not describing what it is, it's describing what it isn't. But by saying what it isn't, you're drawing a relationship to that which it is. That's the classic level of Eira Soiva. So that cannot be the intention. This classic level of infinite per se is not the level that is we connect to and reveal in the world through Skafi Nisapche. We don't mean a relative infinite, that it relates to creation, but it's beyond creation. So in simple words, not beyond, but beyond. What we mean here is that explained the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he says when you cut it the Kutcha, it means a revelation that is beyond. And that will explain why it's called B'Shem Istalik. And that's why this is called, in describing its revelation, Istalik, which means removed or ascend. Why? Because it is drawn down into the world, but it is essentially beyond, not relatively beyond, essentially beyond. True Reimemus, true Istalik, even as it's present. Hope this was followed. Because that's why the passing of tzaddikim is called istalkos. Not that it means that the tzaddik left and ascends and is removed, but it means he's present in the world, but he's present in the world in such a way, in such a deep, lofty way. He brings a revelation of a godliness that is essentially beyond creation, and yet dafka, this is revealed in creation. In the Yeshbeis Igris Begeras HaKodesh Mavadim in Inyan Nistalkus. There's two letters in the Geras HaKodesh, Perek Chavzayin Perek, and Geras Chavzayin and the Geras Chavches. The Sachas the Rebbe calls it, that speak about Istalkus. There in Tanya. There he says, Begeras HaBeis, the second one, which is written there on Keshet Istalkus of Rabbi Bendishev. So there he says, he explains, so there he says like this, that the Alter Rebbe explains as follows. The Gemara says, why is it that right after the passing of Miriam, we get the laws of what? Of the Paraduma. To teach us that just like the Paraduma brings atonement, so to the passing of Tzaddikim bring kapora. because even though the paraduma is not a korban in the regular sense, but the Torah calls it chatas. It's called mechatas. The waters of the paraduma are called mechatas because it brings what? It brings atonement. The Rebbe explains there why is the istalkus of tzaddikim compared dafke to the paraduma and not any other korban. And he explains in Tanya because where was the paraduma prepared? Not in the Beis Hamikdash, not in the Azora, not even on the Harabais, but of Harabais. That's where the paraduma was slaughtered and burnt, etc. Which means that the paraduma, so externally, it would seem like it's less than any korban, because all korbanos have to be shechted in the Azora. Yes, the kochim kalim, kochim, different degrees of severity, of holiness, but they all have to be prepared and consumed within the precincts of the Beis Hamikdash. And here, the paraduma is nasis dafke, where outside the Beis Hamikdash completely. Why? Because on the contrary, it's able to bring atonement. A regular korban can only bring atonement for that which the sin is not mamish, outright transgression. But for a sin that's connected still to klipas noiga, that's why most korbanos are only for a sin done b'shoigeg. But the paradum has the power to bring atonement and to cleanse even an aveda that is completely outside the realm of kedusha, and that is the istalkus of tzaddikim, that the tzaddik's presence and the istalkus, and the presence of the tzaddik as a result of the istalkus is presence so powerful and so great that it can bring atonement and transformation even from the most severe transgression. In the Maimer, the Inyonim Anasim Bifnim, Ein Yechilim Levar Gibel Klimus Hatmeis, all the korbanos and even the ketores that were made inside the Beis Hamikdash proper, so they cannot elevate absolute evil, the lower level of evil. Only that which is prepared outside, part of Hanashis B'chutz, a paraduma that was prepared outside. And it's to this dafka that the Torah makes the comparison. Miriam's istalkus dafka in connection with what? With the paraduma, to bring out, as the Rebbe explains there, that the tzaddik's presence is so great and so powerful, and it comes from such a high place that it can transform and cleanse even outright transgression. It continues in a atai paraduma. There's no paraduma. Because of our sins, the consequence was exiled. But it happened the passing of tzaddikim. Then he says, with respect to the tragedy of the passing of tzaddikim, there are two statements. In the Rosh Hashanah, in Medrash, in Eicha Rabbah. One is that the death of tzaddikim is equal to the burning of the Beis Hamikdash, the house of our God. And then there's a second one, that the passing of tzaddikim is even more difficult than Chub Beis Hamikdash. And that's and so what is the point? The kavana, the Mesiras Nefesh, is in order to bring the transformation of even the greatest darkness and clean it and transform it and make it into light. It's through the istalkus of tzaddikim that even brings even greater the istaliki korda kuchebricho, that their presence afterwards is present in the world. But what is about such a lofty revelation of godliness that's totally beyond the limits of creation in the world, and therefore it's able to transform the greatest darkness. So the Rebbe has to now, he has to overcome all resistance to what he's saying, because istalkus is normally understood as istalkus, gone. So the Rebbe is bringing all the Rebbeim here, and he doesn't bring the sources here, but each one of them mentioned that istalkus means present, but a very long. but a very lofty level. What's present? A revelation of godliness that's tachlis, reimamus, totally beyond, not just beyond creation. So he says, Pirishin Yistalkas, Pirishin Kol Rabbi. So all the Rabbi said, Chakad Marazak and the Alt Rebbe, Chakad Maram Tzoy the Mikkel Rebbe, Chakad Maratzamak, that's a Matzed, Chakad Marash, Marash, Chakad Mur, Yishma said in the Rebbe Rashab, Chak Mar Vechom Yad Mur and the Fidik Rebbe. They all say this in their Maimar and so on. She'ein HaKavana B'Pirish Tevis Yistalkas, Shalila Mal Chas V'Sholem. Yistalka doesn't mean that they ascended heaven with Chas V'Sholem. Ki Kavana Shanim Salamata. It means he's here, but such a lofty level that is beyond creation. The Rebbe concludes, and this is demanded from us. The Hashvi'i in the seventh generation to the Alter Rebbe. The whole Hashvi'i Chavivin and all seventh the beloved, as the Rebbe explained earlier. We didn't earn it, and we didn't. It means we didn't toil to achieve it. But the fact is, we have all of this invested in us, the seventh beloved. And our avoid is to bring the Shekhinah down here, to transform. And Rebbe said these words, the Rebbe couldn't say it, the Rebbe was choking, holding back. Very hard for him to say the words. When he said these words here, and to transform the Shtus the Nefesh Abahamis, Asher Yoda Inish Benavshe, as it hot us. Everybody knows that he struggles with this. And the Koch von Nefesh Abahamis was hot us, und Nefesh Amon nach Nidrike. That not only is he struggling with the Nefesh Abahamis, but even lower than that. What's lower than Nefesh Abahamis? It could be that Rebbe is referring to, that he mentioned a few times. Now, one of the sins that we enumerate in the video of Yom Kippur is Al Chitcha Chatana B'Yetzer Hara. The sin that we sinned with the Yetzer Hara. The question is that every sin's with the Yetzer Hara. What does it mean, the sin of the Yetzer Hara? So once Rebbe explained it more than once, that sometimes a person can be guilty of doing something even the Yetzer Hara wouldn't do. Yetzer Hara has its limits, but he gets so caught up that he dragged himself even to a place the Yetzer Hara wouldn't go. And even this core selfishness, this core indulgence, you have to make from it and make it shtus de kedusha. As we were suggesting earlier, one not simple sin. So simple sin is kofan Nefesh Abahamis. What's the monach nidrike? Okay, you could say that Nefesh Abahamis is koch is just in pleasure, lav dafke sin, and noch nidrike, yeah, all right, is actual sin. Component, what we had mentioned is also true when you're the Inish Benafshi. Each person knows Moras Nafshi and Nefesh Behemtoi. Akoponim, so just to mention something we mentioned earlier, what does it mean to transform the Shtus of the Nefesh Abahamis of Klippa for Shtus the Kedusha? So practically it means that to serve the Eibishter beyond Cheshbon, because that's the whole Shtus of the Nefesh Abahamis. We get caught up in Aveda, and it's really foolish. If you would think for a moment and stop and consider what we're doing, you wouldn't do it. If you'd realize the consequences. But we get caught up in the moment and we throw all consequences to the wind, and I want it here and I want it now. That's a cheshbon which is below seichel. So we've got to take this, not a cheshbon, that's a behavior. So shtus de kedusha means to serve the Eibishter without cheshbonos and not for consequences, what the person's going to gain, but this is what the Eibishter wants, and to do so in a passionate way that goes beyond the mandate of the law itself, and more of as we're learning now in the Rebbe's Maimorim of explain, elaborate Ois Yud Aleph, Midas HaNitzochen. Midas HaNitzochen, true Midas HaNitzochen, victory means everything at all costs. There must total victory and throwing every reservoir of strength that we have into the battle. The Rebbe says in the Maimer that it means that there's no detail is overlooked. Everything is negeya. Everything is critical to the victory, to the kavana halyena. That is shtus the kedusha, as the Rebbe demonstrated the stories first and foremost in Ahavas Yisrael, and of course that's the whole shlichus is based on this. It became normal, but you have to realize that then the stuff Shin Aleph that is talking about going to, as he goes into the next ois, which we'll learn tomorrow, and then Tuesday, Be'ezrat Hashem, to go into a place where a person doesn't build enough from Yiddishkeit and send a couple then a one-way ticket. This is beyond Shtus the Kedusha. The whole world was can't even say against it because it was just so completely off the chart to do such a thing. But of course, they transformed the whole world this way. And the whole world is thankful. Anyway, more stories maybe about that a little bit. Be'ezrat Hashem, tomorrow and Tuesday. Okay, thank you all for listening. And we'll conclude the Maimon.